Let's talk about what's really driving over-niceness. On the surface, it looks like compassion, like you're just being a good person. But if you go deeper into the neuroscience and behavioral psychology, you'll see that it's often rooted in something much less noble: fear of rejection. When someone constantly avoids conflict, always agrees or says yes when they mean no, that's typically not a function of high empathy. It's a protective behavior. It's the nervous system trying to avoid perceived social threat. The brain is wired for social belonging. This is hard-coded into our biology. Rejection, especially repeated or anticipated rejection, activates the same regions of the brain as physical pain, the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. That means your brain treats social exclusion as a survival threat. So what do? You appease, you mold, you go quiet when something bothers you. And over time, that strategy rewires your brain toward passivity. Now, here's where it becomes a problem. When you make people-pleasing your default mode, you're essentially training your brain to value safety over truth. That rewiring affects the dopaminergic system, your brain's reward pathways, because instead of releasing dopamine in response to authentic action, it starts linking dopamine to external validation. And when that happens, you lose internal drive. You stop acting from your own compass. You start living on other people's terms. Fear-based niceness might keep you liked, but it will never make you respected. And the cost is neurochemical. You begin to lose the sharpness of your own decision-making. You reduce your tolerance for necessary conflict. You dilute your identity. And over time, that builds into low-grade anxiety, frustration, even resentment, because deep down, your nervous system knows you're not living congruently. So if you're always being nice to avoid rejection, you're not actually being kind. You're self-protecting. And that distinction matters, especially if you care about long-term mental clarity, healthy relationships, and neural resilience. When you suppress your true feelings, whether it's frustration, disagreement, or even a simple preference, you're not just making a social concession. You're triggering a measurable physiological cost inside your brain and body. Every time you hold back what you really think or feel, your brain has to engage multiple systems to manage that suppression. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and self-control, has to override emotional input from the limbic system, especially the amygdala. That takes significant energy. It's not sustainable. Over time, this constant suppression leads to increased activity in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, HPA axis. That's your brain's main stress circuit. It raises cortisol levels. It disrupts sleep. It impairs memory consolidation and weakens immune function. There's also a disruption in autonomic balance. Your sympathetic nervous system, the one responsible for fight or flight, remains slightly activated even when the threat is just internal conflict. So you might appear calm on the outside, but neurologically, you're running hot. That's why people who constantly hide their real thoughts or emotions often experience chronic fatigue, brain fog, or burnout. Their nervous system is spending too much time in regulation mode, not performance mode. And here's the part most people don't realize. When you chronically suppress emotions, you also dampen your ability to feel joy, motivation, and connection. The brain doesn't compartmentalize emotional states perfectly. If you numb frustration, you're also muting passion. If you suppress anger, you're dulling your capacity for courage. This is not about venting or being impulsive. It's about alignment. When your external behavior doesn't match your internal state, your brain flags that as a problem, a mismatch. And over time, that internal conflict accumulates as stress, which starts to erode executive function. You become more reactive, less focused, and more likely to make poor decisions, not because you're weak, but because your biology is overloaded. The pressing truth to keep the peace might look stable, but under the hood, it's chaos, and your brain is paying the price for it. Let's break this down at the level of brain and behavior. Chronic appeasement, constantly adjusting yourself to avoid conflict or maintain harmony, doesn't just affect your relationships. It rewires your motivational systems and distorts your sense of identity. When you appease repeatedly, you're sending a signal to your brain that your own needs, goals, and values are secondary. Over time, this changes how your dopaminergic system functions. Dopamine is the primary neuromodulator involved in motivation and goal-directed behavior. It's what drives effort, focus, and reward seeking. But when your actions are consistently shaped by what others want rather than what you value, the dopamine system begins to lose its internal reference point. You start chasing external cues, approval, praise, comfort, instead of pursuing goals that align with your own biology and beliefs. This is why people who are stuck in a cycle of people-pleasing often report feeling unmotivated, aimless, or numb. Their brain isn't registering progress towards self-directed goals. It's running loops based on avoiding discomfort rather than moving toward purpose. And here's where identity comes into play. Identity isn't a fixed concept. It's built through consistent action over time. Every time you speak up, take a stand, or make a decision that reflects your values, you reinforce neural patterns tied to self-defection. But when you habitually appease, you interrupt that pattern. You become more reactive than intentional. The medial prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain associated with self-referential thinking, starts relying more on external feedback to shape your sense of self. This leaves you with a blurred internal compass. You start asking, what do they want me to say, instead of what do I believe? And that subtle shift compounds. Over months or years, it leads to an erosion of confidence, authenticity, and purpose. Appeasement might keep you temporarily safe, but neurologically, it's expensive. It diminishes the very systems responsible for drive and clarity. If you want to feel motivated and deeply grounded in who you are, you can't build your life around keeping the peace. You have to start telling the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. That's how the brain learns who you are. Saying no isn't just a boundary-setting behavior, it's a neurobiological intervention. When you say no in situations that conflict with your values, time, or energy, you're not being difficult. You're reinforcing self-respect at the level of neural circuitry. Here's what happens in the brain. Every time you make a choice that aligns with your internal standards, you activate the prefrontal cortex, specifically the dorsolateral region, which is involved in executive control and long-term planning. That action, resisting immediate social comfort in favor of long-term integrity, strengthens top-down regulation. You're training your brain to prioritize intentional action over automatic approval seeking. At the same time, the act of saying no triggers a cascade of internal reinforcement. The striatum, a region involved in reward processing, responds positively when your behavior aligns with your goals. That means you don't just survive the discomfort of setting a boundary, you actually build confidence from it. And that confidence has a neurochemical signature: elevated dopamine and reduced cortisol. You're less stressed, more focused, and more grounded. Over time, this repeated behavior creates durable neural pathways, what we call Hebbian learning, neurons that fire together, wire together. The more you practice healthy resistance, the easier it becomes. You reduce the activation of the default people-pleasing circuits and build a new behavioral baseline, one that's anchored in clarity, not compliance. Also, saying no isn't just about rejection. It's about signaling to your own brain what matters. It tells your nervous system, I know what I stand for. And that clarity is critical for cognitive efficiency. When your choices reflect your principles, you reduce internal conflict. Less decision fatigue, less rumination, more bandwidth for meaning. So no, saying no isn't selfish. It's neuroprotective. It's how you build internal alignment, functional autonomy, and durable self-respect, all of which are essential for mental resilience and long-term performance. Authenticity isn't just a moral idea, it's a metabolic advantage. When you're being real, when your behavior aligns with your internal state, your brain and body operate more efficiently. That's not philosophy. When you fake agreement, suppress disagreement, or present a version of yourself that's socially safer but internally false, your brain has to work overtime. The prefrontal cortex has to manage impression control, emotional inhibition, and social prediction, all while suppressing input from deeper limbic structures like the amygdala, which are signaling discomfort. This kind of internal dissonance increases cognitive load. You're burning more glucose, taxing more neural circuits, and creating unnecessary friction in your system. The autonomic nervous system also pays a price. Faking it engages low-level stress responses. You stay in a sympathetic leaning state with elevated heart rate variability, increased cortisol, and background muscle tension. It's subtle, but it's cumulative. Over time, that chronic activation depletes energy, reduces recovery, and slows down executive function. In contrast, authenticity reduces that load. When what you say and do matches what you think and feel, the brain operates in a synchronized, energy-efficient pattern. There's less conflict between regions, better communication between the prefrontal cortex and limbic system, and reduced activation of error detection networks like the anterior cingulate cortex. In simple terms, fewer internal alarms going off that create space for better memory, focus, and emotional regulation. And here's the kicker. Authenticity improves processing speed in social contexts. You don't have to monitor micro expressions, recalibrate your tone, or constantly run simulations about how others might perceive you. That's a major metabolic relief. It frees up bandwidth for creativity, problem solving, and presence. Being real isn't just a preference, it's a performance advantage. It protects your energy, sharpens your cognition, and builds durable emotional resilience. Faking it might buy you temporary comfort, but authenticity is how you win long term. Neurologically and biologically, boundaries aren't walls, they're signals. And what they signal on a neurobiological level is stability. When someone sets clear, consistent boundaries, their behavior becomes predictable. And in terms of social neuroscience, predictability is what the brain equates with safety. That's the foundation of trust. Let's break it down. Human relationships are governed by our brain's ability to detect patterns. The orbitofrontal cortex, part of the prefrontal system, is constantly assessing the behavior of others, asking, is this person consistent? Are they safe? Do their actions match their words? When someone lacks boundaries, when they constantly shift based on pressure or approval, that internal assessment system flags them as unstable, even if they're agreeable or pleasant. On the other hand, someone who can say no, who can assert a need without aggression, and who maintains alignment between their values and their actions activates a completely different response in the brain. They become reliable. The nervous system can relax around them because there's no guesswork. And that reliability on a neural level is what fosters real trust, not forced politeness or constant availability. Boundaries also reduce social noise. They tell people, here's where I begin, here's where I end. That clarity reduces ambiguity, and ambiguity is a major source of social stress. When people aren't sure how far they can go with you, when your limits are undefined, they may push or withdraw, often unconsciously. That creates instability in both directions. But when your boundaries are consistent, you anchor the interaction. You create a container of certainty. And from a neurobiological standpoint, certainty is calming. It increases oxytocin, the neurochemical associated with bonding, and reduces activation in stress circuits like the amygdala. So if you want to be trusted, really trusted, not just liked, don't try to please everyone. Be clear, be consistent, set limits. That's what communicates strength. That's what creates safety. And that's what builds lasting functional human connection at the level of brain and biology. When you live for approval, when your actions, words, and decisions are constantly shaped by how others might respond, you shift your brain into a fundamentally reactive state. You're not acting from clarity or direction. You're acting from anticipation, from prediction, from fear, and that has a real measurable impact on how your brain functions. The reactive state is dominated by the limbic system, particularly the amygdala and insular cortex. These regions scan for threat, not just physical danger, but social disapproval. When your brain is wired for approval seeking, it interprets even minor cues, tone, facial expressions, as potential rejection. That hypervigilance elevates cortisol, narrows focus, and increases the likelihood of impulsive behavior. You're not choosing, you're reacting. In this mode, your prefrontal cortex, the seat of long-term planning, goal setting, and self-directed action, takes a back seat. You operate based on external stimuli, not internal conviction. You start adapting to people instead of adapting to your mission. That hijacks your ability to think deeply, reflect, or course correct. Your brain is too busy asking, do they like me? Instead of, is this right for me? And here's the deeper cost. When you're reactive, your sense of agency erodes. Agency, the belief that you have control over your life, is one of the most powerful predictors of mental health and cognitive performance. But approval seeking chips away at that. It trains your brain to depend on feedback loops that you don't control. That makes your confidence fragile and your attention fragmented. Intentionality is different. It's top-down processing. It means you decide who you want to be, what matters, and how to act, even when it's uncomfortable. That requires internal stability, and neurologically, it builds more durable pathways in the prefrontal cortex and striatum. These systems reinforce clarity, not compliance. So if your mind is always scanning for how to fit in or be liked, you're not in charge. You're stuck in survival mode, and as long as you're in that loop, you'll never access the full power of a focused, grounded, intentional brain. So here's the bottom line. Being nice to everyone might make you feel safe in the moment, but neurologically, psychologically, and biologically, it comes at a high cost. You trade authenticity for approval, clarity for confusion, and resilience for chronic stress. The brain thrives on alignment between what you think, what you feel, and what you do. When you live in that alignment, you don't just feel better, you function better. You focus deeper, you lead stronger, you connect more honestly. This isn't about being rude or dismissive. It's about reclaiming authority over your own nervous system. It's about choosing truth over comfort, boundaries over burnout, and respect over temporary acceptance. Stop being nice to everyone. Start being real with yourself. That's where freedom begins. That's where strength is built. And that's the version of you the world actually needs.